All right. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Petra Al-Sufi, and I am the Senior Outreach and Partnerships Manager at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I'm grateful for your presence with us today and for our amazing and esteemed panelists who are joining us on this conversation about American Muslim families in focus, which we don't often get an opportunity to discuss American Muslim families as a community. And today we are highlighting some new research coming out of ISPU. For those who are joining us for the first time, or for those who have been with us on this journey, if you're one of our supporters, thank you so much. For those who are joining us, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding have been around for more than 20 years, doing rigorous research on American Muslims and setting the ground for in-depth research for experts who want to go in-depth on certain topics. ISPU envision a society where American Muslims are thriving and equal. And we do that through researching American Muslims and communities that are connected to them with two focus. One, hoping to build understanding and bridges between American Muslims and other communities in a pluralistic society, and see what this religious minority what challenges does it face, what contributions does it make, what connections does it have to other faith communities, what are the similarities, what are some of the differences. So policymakers, interfaith leaders, community leaders, educators, journalists can look at American Muslims in connection to other faith communities in the society. The second part of our research, or the second focus of our research, is strengthening communities. That is looking at American Muslims as a community, a religious community, but as a group of people who have their own issues and challenges and aspirations. Looking at American Muslim families, looking at youth, looking at marriages and divorce, looking at American Muslim institutions, and helping the American Muslim community look at itself internally and see what's going really well and what are the things that need to be improved, and how can we make informed decisions within our own community. American Muslims live in a society where they're always on the defense because there are so many challenges coming at them. And often we don't have the time or the resources dedicated to looking at our own community internally. And today's conversation meant to be in addition to the amazing work that many of our panelists do on a daily basis, where they're looking at topics related to American Muslims internally. Now, this research is coming from our American Muslim poll, which my colleague Aram Akramullah will be sharing more about the specific data that we're talking about today and about American Muslim poll. But American Muslim poll is one of the research projects that we do among many, where we look again at very diverse topics, everything from a broad overview and overview of American Muslim and other faith communities' views on certain topics, to in-depth studies that look, for example, Native American Muslims, look at marriages and divorce, look at American Muslim youth, and so on. It look at American mosques and so on and so forth. And the idea for that is we provide the basis or the basic information and data, and experts like our panelists today could build on them and go in depth. And so it is my honor today to welcome our esteemed panelists to talk about housing, American Muslim youth, and school choices for families, and also taking a look at elderly care in our community, which again, you will see what the data is telling us about all of that. But before we get into the specific of each topic, I want to welcome my colleague, Aram Akramullah, who is the Senior Research Project Manager at ISPU, where she manages activities of multiple research projects from initiation through dissemination. Aram has also served as a co-author on ISPU's American Muslim Poll report and has authored several analysis pieces. Previously, she worked at a Child Trends as a research and analyst on both quantitative and qualitative research, and more about her will be shared in the chat. More about the bios of our panelists and speakers will be shared in the chat today. So I'm just giving you a very quick overview and allowing more time for the conversation. Just a couple reminders, the chat will be open for all of us to engage in conversation related to today's topic. So please go ahead and share where you're joining us from and what drew you to this topic and what is the work that you're doing. As well as the Q&A box, please, any questions related to this topic, direct them to the Q&A box so we could keep track of them and allow a time for them at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, welcome my colleague Aaron to share the data with us.
Thank you so much, Petra. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to start off today's very important conversation with the grounding in ISPU's latest research. The research I'll be sharing today is based on ISPU's 2022 American Muslim poll. This poll was fielded between February 22nd and March 21st, 2022. American Muslim poll was administered to nationally representative samples of Muslims, Jews, and the general U.S. public, of which include several key religious groups and non-religious groups, as noted on the slide. All participants, regardless of religious affiliation, were given identical surveys. And you can learn more about our methodology and about the poll in general at ispu.org/poll. We had the following expert scholars serve as advisors on American Muslim poll. Their expertise ranges across topics and methodologies. So it's important to begin before we kind of jump right into the topics as Petra outlined. It's really important to kind of ground our conversation with some context in terms of the demographic makeup of American Muslims. And this will allow just for a more nuanced and a more informed conversation. So this pie chart represents the racial ethnic diversity of the Muslim community in the United States. From this chart, we learn that there's no majority racial ethnic group among Muslims in the United States. 27% identify as Black or African American, 28% as white, 18% as Asian, 12% identify as Arab, 8% as Hispanic, 1% as Native American or Indigenous, and 5% as other. And I'll ask my colleagues to drop a link in the chat to a piece we have that goes in depth a little bit more about who are white Muslims, as I know that's a question that often comes up. In addition, when we compare this chart to like a similar chart for the other groups that we surveyed, or the other religious groups that we surveyed, we find that American Muslims are the most racially and ethnically diverse religious group in the United States. Additionally, Muslims are the youngest religious group in the US. In particular, a much higher proportion of Muslims fall between the ages of 18 and 24 compared to all other groups. So you see in this graph, the orange bar represents Muslims, and you see that about a quarter, 26%, are between the ages of 18 to 24 compared to 2 to 12% of other groups. And this has implications for the topics that we're going to talk about today, because you see that the younger cohort, there's a larger percent in the younger cohort who might be moving towards family formation and some of the topics that we'll be talking about. Muslims are also the most likely religious group in the US to have a household income below the poverty line. A third of Muslims, 33%, have a household income below 30,000 compared to 12 to 20% of other groups. And this point's really critical to keep in mind in discussions we're going to have today around housing, school decisions, school options, and also in terms of care for aging adults. All of these topics have a financial component to them, so it's really important to keep this in mind. On the other end of the spectrum, so to go back to the graph, the orange bars represent household incomes less than 30,000. And the blue bars, the light blue bars, represent household incomes of 100,000 or more. And so here we find that 22%, about 1/5 of Muslims, have an household income of 100,000 or more, and that's pretty much on par with most other groups. In terms of education, Muslims are as likely as most other groups to hold a college degree. Finally, at 43%, which is represented by the leftmost light blue bar, 43% of Muslims are as likely as other groups to be employed full-time, and fewer are retired. So the orange bars indicate those who are retired. And this is what we would expect given the findings around age, given that Muslims tend to be younger, we would expect that fewer are retired. So now that I've shared some demographics, they'll be important to keep in mind throughout the rest of my presentation and also during the discussion between panelists. I'll move into the heart of today's conversations and the topics. So our poll included questions that provide initial data on experiences of Muslim families when it comes to housing, raising children in terms of their schooling, and caring for aging parents. You might be left with more questions after you see the data, but what the data provide are a starting point and a foundation for future studies to explore these topics further in depth. So for the first time in 2022 on American Muslim Poll, we asked about home ownership. And we found that slightly more than half of Muslims, 53%, report owning their home. And this is on par with 57% of the general public and 49% of those not affiliated with a religious group. Muslims are less likely than Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and white evangelicals to own their home. We took a closer look at home ownership by age for Muslims and the general public. So on this graph, Muslims are indicated by the orange bars and the general public by the light blue bars. And so what we find is that for both, the proportion who own their home does go up by age. But when you look at, for Muslims, this is kind of a more steady, it's not like a sharp uptick. But when you look at the light blue bars, you see a very clear gradual increase between 18 to 29, 30 to 49, and 50 plus. So it's a more pronounced uptick. And when we look closer kind of within group differences between Muslims and the general public within age groups, we find that Muslims ages 18 to 29 are more likely than their age peers in the general public to own their own home. So this refers to the first set of bars. So you see that 45% of Muslims between the ages of 18 to 29 report owning their home compared to 29% of the same age in the general public. On the other end of the spectrum, looking at Muslims ages 50 and older, we find that they're less likely than their age peers in the general public to report owning their home. So 61% of Muslims ages 50 and older compared to 76% in the general public. Looking at those more middle years, ages 30 to 49, we find that the proportion, Muslims and the general public in those ages are equally likely to report owning their own home. When it comes to renting, we find that sort of the other half of Muslims, so 47% rent their home, and that's on par with 49% of the non-affiliated, but more likely than Jews, Catholics, Protestants, white evangelicals, and the general public. When looking by age, we find that Muslims ages 18 to 29 are statistically as likely as their age peers in the general public to rent. So that's 55% and 68% respectively. And the same pattern holds true for 30 to 49-year-olds. Where we do find a difference is in Muslims ages 50 and older, where we find sort of the opposite of what we found in terms of home ownership. So here we find that Muslims ages 50 and older are more likely than their age peers in the general public to rent. So 39% versus 19%. We don't have, direct data that can sort of speak to the why of some of these age differences, but some things we've thought through that could possibly explain would be, perhaps an older generation of Muslims may not have had as many Islamic financing options for purchasing a home. And older adults perhaps may prefer to rent rather than buy a home for the first time in their retirement years. So kind of wrapping up this conversation around, or this research side presentation on home ownership, We do know that from other research that homeownership in general in the United States is becoming less and less attainable for Americans in general, and the cost of rent is at an all-time high. And Muslims are not immune to these effects and these impacts. So Muslims feel this just as much as anyone else in the general population. And so the implication is that Muslims, just like all other Americans, must choose to embark on home ownership or continue to face higher and higher rent prices as they're raising families and possibly also caring for aging parents. And just one factor to consider that might be somewhat more particular to Muslim communities is cultural norms around intergenerational households among Muslims. Moving on now to schooling decisions. So this is another important topic that American Muslim families face in terms of make choices around education for their children. For Muslims with school-age children, decisions around education and school options are a major topic of discussion. You know, there's public school options, private school options, Islamic school options, homeschooling, and really the choices have only become more top of mind since the pandemic opened up a wider array of options. So to kind of get us started on this conversation, we find that 40% of Muslims report having school-age children. So that's between the ages of kindergarten and 12th grade. And this is more likely than about a quarter of Jews, Protestants, white evangelicals, the non-affiliated, and the general public. So only Catholics are on par with Muslims when it comes to having school-age children. So in our poll, just some things to think about before I go into the data are that within one household or family, there may be multiple children who are educated differently. You might have one kid in public school, one kid who's homeschooled, or one kid in Islamic school and one kid in public school, or any such combination. So just something to keep in mind. So what we'll be reporting on are the percent of Muslim parents who have at least a child in these various schooling options. So I want to be clear that what I'm presenting is not the percent of Muslim children, our base, our sample of who we're looking at. We question the parents who have children and ask them to tell us how they're schooling their children. I'm having a little trouble advancing my slide. Okay. So to get us started, the majority of Muslim families, 72%, as noted in the orange bar, send at least one child to public school, which is less likely than 83% of the general public, but more likely than 47% of Jewish families. With the majority of Muslim children of school age attending public schools, it's really important that public schools are made to be safe spaces for the growth and development of Muslim children. And we've previously shared this slide and these data around bullying. We have found that roughly half, 48% of Muslim families with school-age children report that their child has experienced some level of religious-based bullying in the year prior to the survey. So this just reiterates the importance of creating safe spaces in these schools. Nearly 1/4 of Muslim families send at least one child to a full-time Islamic school. So that's 23%. And so in this question, we asked about, do you send your child, the option was a private religious school associated with your religious community. So for Muslims, that would be an Islamic school. For Jewish families, that would be a Jewish school. And so we find that Muslims are more likely than 6% of the general public who send their child to a religious school associated with their own religious group, but less likely than 44% of Jewish families that do the same. Another option when it comes to private schools are private religious schools not associated with your religious group. So for example, for Muslims, that could be a Muslim family who sends their child to a Catholic school. And we find that 11% of Muslim families do that, which is more likely than 2% of the general public. And then a third private school option is private schools that are secular and non-religious, and we find another 11% of Muslims take this option compared to 1% of the general public. So the implication here is that Islamic schools there's a potential for them to gain an additional 22% of Muslim families who are in this sort of private school market. At the same time, further exploration is needed into potential barriers to accessing Islamic schools among families wishing to do so. Some of these barriers may include cost, location, resources to meet the needs of diverse learners, and more. Finally, when it comes to schooling, there's the option of homeschooling, and we find that 6% of Muslims report homeschooling at least one of their K through 12 children, on par with 5% of Jews and 10% of the general public. National data show that the percent of homeschool children has risen since 1999, with significant growth during the pandemic. Again, additional research is needed into the particular motivations and experiences of Muslim homeschool families. Now moving on to sort of the other end of the lifespan, which is caring for aging adults. So if you look first and focus on the orange bars in this graph, we find that more than 1/3 of Muslims, 36%, report that they're caring for an aging adult. And that's more likely than 11 to 19% of other groups. And just to note that our question asks about care, whether it's given within the same household or not. We looked at this by gender and found that Muslim men and Muslim women are equally likely to say that they're providing care for an aging adult. And as we would expect, Muslims between the ages of 30 to 49 at 52% are more likely than younger Muslims between the ages of 18 to 29 to be caring for elders. Finally, when you look at sort of the blue bar and the red bar in combination, so the blue bar represents the percent of each group that has school-age children. So I previously mentioned that for Muslims, that's 40%. So when you look at those two bars together, we start to paint a picture of Muslims who are kind of in this so-called sandwich generation. By that, I mean, we're referring to adults who are simultaneously caring for aging parents as well as their own children. So in this graph, you see that those two bars, the orange and blue in combination, are both high, relative to the other groups. So based on these findings, we've identified several needs for Muslim families. Expanded home finance offerings for Muslim home ownership, education about rent assistance and affordable housing options, advocacy organizations specialized in advocating school systems for providing safety for Muslim children, as well as providing them with the appropriate religious accommodations. Education and training for school system staff on the needs of Muslim students, as well as best practices to create safe environments. Quality Islamic schools to attract and retain interested Muslim families. And culturally competent services for aging Muslims. Before I pass it back to Petra, I just want to also share that we are exploring some of these topics further in depth in American Muslim Poll 2025, which is we're currently just getting out of the field with that project. So please be on the lookout later in 2025 and into 2026, where we'll have new research to kind of add to this conversation and keep it moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aram. And as you see, this is very rich data. And I'm happy now to welcome our panelists to help us make sense of it. Before I actually introduce them and ask them the specific question, we debated a lot about combining these topics in one webinar versus having separate notes. What does housing have to do with schooling? What does schooling have to do with taking care of elders? And I think if we take a look and kind of see the environment and how these topics are really interconnected, especially in choosing the communities that we live in or the places that we purchase homes or rent homes, in the way our school systems work here in the US, especially the public school system and its connection to housing and taxes and all of that. All of these topics are interconnected in one way, shape, or form, and our panelists will help us kind of make that connection. But as someone who's of an immigrant background, you don't realize the connection between these topics until you are in that position. Meaning, I just understand the impact or the issues with renting and buying a home until I was in that situation. I didn't understand the value of or the importance of picking a community, where I will rent or purchase my home beyond just being with people that I want to be with, until I had to assess the school system that my relatives are attending and seeing, okay, what does that school look like? And, how it's being funded and how the engagement matter or does not. It didn't understand the importance of resources around elderly care and resources around, providing a dignified place for our elders to be and to thrive until I was in that position. And so this is a long way of saying they are interconnected, especially in this society. And so to help all of us make sense of that, our panelists today, are amazing people who do this work every day on the ground. We have Brother Mark Crane. All of their bios will be shared in the chat. I'm just going to quickly introduce them. Mark Crane, who is the Deputy Director of Economic Development for Wayne County, which is the largest county in the state of Michigan. Where he's the leader in business attraction, community development, and environmental justice and sustainability, serving all 43 of Wayne County's communities. He's also the executive director of Dream of Detroit, which focuses a lot on housing justice and an initiative combining community development and organizing to revitalize a neighborhood and build a thriving community on the west side of Detroit. So he will be helping us understand the issue around housing. We also have Dr. Samira Ahmed, who is the founder of the Family and Youth Institute. So they research everything related to American Muslim family and youth. And she serves as the executive director from 2006 to 2025. She holds a PhD in clinical psychology from Fairleigh Dickinson University. Again, their bios will be shared in the chat. We also have Sister Zainab Husseini, who is a registered dietitian by profession and serves as the program manager at Olive Community Services, where they provide services and care for the elderly. And so she will be helping us around that. She also works as an inpatient registered nurse at St. Jude's Medical Center in Fullerton, and as a consultant dietitian with Alzheimer's Family Center. And then last but not least is Dr. Mariam Hassan, who's currently works as a strategic campaign specialist with Care National, leading the Unhostile Campus campaign, which is an amazing campaign, by the way. If you have not checked it out, you need to. Aiming at promoting free speech and academic freedom for students, faculty, and students. Also in her background, she was Islamic school math teacher for more than 8 years, and she researches leadership in schools, both Islamic and in public. So she will be helping us understand the decisions around schooling. So let me start with you, Brother Mark. Like I said, the places we choose to live and pick our housing and where we move our families really impact the rest of the decisions we make, whether it's schooling or elderly care or all of that. But there are so many decisions related to housing that many of us are unaware of. So based on your work with both Wayne County and Dream of Detroit, can you help us make sense? What are some of the challenges? And I want you to focus a little bit more on the institutional ones, some of the challenges and successes around housing and housing decisions for American Muslim families.
Mm. Okay, well, first of all, assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you, Sister Petra, for queuing up the question. Um, so, starting with challenges, and I get a bit long-winded talking about housing, so I'm going to try to move kind of quickly through these. And a lot of them, thankfully, were already explored in the research. So, starting with gentrification, right? And the data that you all have showing that Muslims are more likely to be renters. I really love that Sister Aram said that Muslims are not immune to these effects when talking about the rising cost of homeownership. I think that quote from her could be applied to so many aspects of life in America where, where we're not immune to what's happening at a macro level economically or politically or culturally. And these things are sort of being filtered through our own experiences and values and impacting us in a particular way. But homeownership costs rising, especially in urban cities, centers, is definitely something that we're seeing be an issue across the board. So, what the stat about 33% of Muslims making less than $30,000 really stood out to me, because 33% is also about the poverty rate in the city of Detroit, actually. And, so often, I think, where there's this picture that's painted that the American Muslim community is especially well adjusted and sort of well off, and especially because we like to sort of put a stake down about our long history in the country. We're often telling kind of this victory narrative, and it does detract from the realities that we are an incredibly socioeconomically diverse community and a lot of folks battling issues of poverty. So whereas inner cities have historically been important, like landing places for immigrant families because of their affordability. And when we think about the Muslim community, a lot of that influx in Muslim immigrant population came after white flight began, after folks began abandoning urban centers kind of en masse and opening up those spaces at cheaper values. So now we're seeing this reversal in neighborhood economics. That means that, immigrant families are often ending up in like the inner ring suburbs as opposed to these urban centers. And it's a different social dynamic that's being introduced. Financing homes according to our values, of course, is another issue. And you all mentioned this in your research as well. So, there are, of course, models that have been introduced to help us engage this issue as Muslims. First, sort of authoritative legal opinions that we could, buy using traditional American means in the cases of our first homes and so forth. And a lot of folks will rely on that opinion to enter the housing market. But then tools that we've introduced, like diminishing co-ownership models of home purchasing or lease-to-own models, right? The issue is that some community members simply don't trust these projects, right? They see them as sort of intractable from the greater sort of interest-bearing market kind of schemes. And, I think, it's just worth noting that they don't work for everyone, or everyone's not really sold on them. But they are a sincere effort and obviously have a lot of scholarly backing behind them to make housing more accessible to Muslims in this country. I think in our line of work, we're also thinking about the supply side. So, with Dream of Detroit, we're a community development organization. We've done housing renovations. We're currently working on our first new construction project. And so if you're an individual buyer, you may be responsible for and particularly attuned to the how you're purchasing your home. Is it a musharaka, purchase? Is it a traditional? Are you saving? But you're not often thinking about, like, how was that home actually built? What was the financing mechanism that actually built that home? And you're not necessarily legally required to, like, you're not accountable for that per se. But as we're trying to build a community development organization that's Muslim-led and sort of rooted in our values, we're thinking about, like, how can we work with some of these funders to get them to offer loan products that are created in ways, written in ways that are legally acceptable to us, right? How can we get larger institutions thinking about bringing capital into their systems through mechanisms like sukuks, like Islamically compliant bonds that give American Muslims and Muslims abroad an opportunity to invest, and then directly tie those things to assets like housing, making them more accessible to everyone. Right. And so that's, we're kind of working on both sides of this issue, because we're producing these homes and want to make sure that Muslims can buy them in ways that are ethically sound to them. But we also want to make sure that as Muslims, we're producing them in ways that are ethically sound to us and giving that our best effort. I will also say that, we're sort of trying to build a Muslim community development ecosystem. That's another issue that, you know, is that we don't necessarily have a large network of Muslim practitioners of community development who are learning from one another, sharing learnings, sharing financial products, sharing templated documents, etc. And we see other faith communities that have more tenure in this line of work, having those networks, those associations, being able to scale faster, get their startups off the ground faster, because they've put more time into building that sort of that sort of cohesion. And then lastly, just on the, another I'll mention just on challenges, it's like political and civic education, right? A lot of times, so for instance, we're part of a group here called the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. Thousands and thousands of Detroiters being overtaxed, driven into property tax foreclosure, having their homes taken from them. It's a long story, but it's a complex story. And it's a story that was happening to thousands of people in isolation. And so you have folks losing the home they inherited from their mom or their grandma or what have you, and losing the dignity associated with that. And oftentimes that's sort of happening in isolation. But these issues are complex, and they have compounded effects on communities that are either low income or sort of more newly arriving. And that's important for the broad expanse of our Muslim community. And then I will say, you know, in our neighborhood in particular, you know, we deal with 100-year-old kind of frame homes that we've been renovating and making them accessible to families. And a lot of times the 1,200 or 1,400 square feet homes that we have available just aren't the most appealing to these really big Muslim families. You know, Prophet ﷺ told us to have big families. He'd be proud of us on the Day of Judgment. People take that really to heart. I think, you know, some of you guys' ISPU's research has shown that, you know, a lot of the growth in Muslim communities, both nationally and globally, is more about the size of families and birth rates than it is conversion necessarily. So we do have big families, and we do have multi-generational families at a higher rate than mainstream America. And those things do make it difficult to build in urban areas, especially. And then I'll just mention a few successes, though. Those were the challenges. One is obviously, of course, we've done really well at like building around masajid, making our houses of worship sort of the central pieces of our communal life. We see this all over the country. It happens organically. And the masjid routinely serves as this like welcoming ground for both newly arriving Muslims and new Muslims, folks who are converts to this faith. And we encounter a lot of them in our work. And that's really important. And I think it's a success for our community, because it continues to play that role even as we're building other institutions. You know, subdivisions that are predominantly Muslim, which often happens somewhat discreetly the way that these are formed. You know, I think living by our values as much as we can. We know a lot of Muslims who will rent until they can buy outright, you know, and that's no shade toward those mechanisms that folks are creating to make homeownership more accessible. But a lot of folks will just wait on both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum and say, I'm going to rent until I've saved up enough to purchase that home. And I'm positive with all certainty that I haven't dealt with any, you know, interest-based mechanisms. And the last thing I'll say is just building up the institutions to solve our own problems. So of course, ISPU and, you know, FYI and others that are producing this necessary research for us, groups like DREAM that are trying to, you know, sort of put this research into action in ways, running programs like timeless touch-ups that help seniors age in their homes more gracefully, thinking about the Muslim community development ecosystem so that we can build purposeful communities across all socioeconomic levels, and you don't have to be privileged and well off to be able to build an intentional community. So I think that we are really building these institutions as our community continues to grow. So thank you for allowing me to share those things.
Thank you so much, Mark. And, you know, there's so much that could, you know, so much more conversations that need to happen around housing, but this is the first time that we are hosting a conversation that include the discussion around housing. And I hope this is the beginning of, you know, curiosity for those who are interested, but also will follow up with those who are already working on the topic, but also, you know, opening a door for more research. Like you said, there's so much more research that needs to be done. This is just us looking at like two things related to housing when there's so much more. So building off the topic of housing, you know, and you did mention, you know, starting with building the community around the masjid, you know, making the decisions around housing. And through that, you know, we have the community, we have the homes, or we're renting the homes. And now we are moving into, okay, what does the Muslim family look like? What are the challenges and the issues? Whether we are in a majority Muslim community or you're the only Muslim family in a neighborhood that doesn't have a Muslim community. And so for that, Dr. Samira, this is your organization's work looking in depth into American Muslim families, from youth to elderly. We've shared a lot of data on that topic, previously in the past few years and so many topics related to American Muslim families, and then today specifically around schooling in elderly care. But stepping back a little bit, tell us, what is the state of the American Muslim family? What are we dealing with? Keep it high level, tell us some of the challenges and some of the successes. And I know some of our other panelists will go a little bit more into the schooling in the elderly care, but what is the overall state of the American Muslim family?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, Petra, and thank you for the work that you've been doing at ISPU. When we think about kind of the big picture of what's going on and connecting all the different topics that we're talking about today, what we find is that there are a lot of different challenges and issues that we are experiencing, and we're not necessarily labeling. And as we try to understand what those issues are, that's going to help us address the challenges ahead of us, right? So when we're thinking about kind of, thinking about raising young people, like all parents, Muslim, non-Muslim, other backgrounds, right? Muslim caregivers are managing, academics, school stress, the after-school activities, the mental health and physical needs of their children. But at the same time, there's another layer that they're also dealing with, and that's dealing with kind of helping their kids navigate, race-based bullying that's happening at school, the discrimination. And what we don't realize is that's actually heightened probably since the last study, in which, because young people are seeing the hypocrisy that's going on in school and how the genocide is being addressed within their school systems. And this constant discrimination that they're seeing really has an impact on their self-esteem, academic success, social skills, and long-term mental health. And I think one of our later panelists will be talking about that later on. So there's that aspect. And so while young people and their parents are struggling to kind of navigate that, there aren't that many resources, and that's kind of the challenge that we have, and that's the challenge that FYI is working to develop resources, evidence-based resources, to help parents navigate these issues. And so while parents are dealing with that aspect, they're also recognizing and dealing with an aging community. Many of our parents are aging, and now they're facing experiences of social isolation, health issues. Some are experiencing language barriers and financial barriers because maybe they didn't have the financial literacy or the wherewithal to plan ahead for retirement. And so there are all of these issues and challenges that our parents are experiencing, and many of them don't realize the resources that are currently available, the tax dollars that they've spent, they've contributed to, and are not actually using the resources that are available state, city, county wide. And so that's kind of a miss for many of our elders. And so, one of the things that the FYI has been doing is really working on a project in Canton, Michigan, to look at, okay, how do we go? What's the process of identifying these resources and communicating it to our elders, and then for them to actually access and use. And the reason why this all matters is because they're not accessing the care that they need and that they can that could help them age with dignity. But also, as you mentioned earlier, that 36% of Muslims are providing care to their elders or other caregivers, other individuals, right? So, one of the things that does is that's another layer that our families are experiencing. You have the layer of parenting, And now you have the layer of caregiving. And so as you're putting that together, that's kind of becoming like a pressure cooker for many of our marriages. You know, in addition to all that, you also have the workplace stress. And so what we're finding is that that almost more than half of our families, Muslim families, are reporting one major unresolved marriage conflict that no matter what they do, they're not able to address. And what we're also seeing from then, almost 60% are saying that they need more community support because they're dealing with all these challenges. And so while there's an increase in individuals seeking therapy and taking preventative measures such as premarriage education, what's still lacking is our community infrastructure. And for us to realize that we need to normalize and provide these resources. You know, FYI and many other mental health organizations are working to address this need. And so when you're seeing all of these aspects, the standard generation is, you know, it's not just multitasking, it's carrying many different loads that there aren't that many community support systems in place. There are a few organizations like the FYI and other mental health institutions or therapists that are working to address these needs using evidence-based resources to provide resources to our community. But with targeted supports, we can actually make those changes. And, you know, I'm thankful for ISPU for the research that you all are doing, as well as the other panelists, because all of this work is connected. And if you don't have a safe space to live, such as housing, it's hard to raise a family. And when you have multiple stressors going on at school, at home, at work, then it's also hard to care for our elders. And so all of this is connected. And so thank you for bringing us together to address these issues and challenges. And you know, I look forward to the continued conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samira. And yes, you're absolutely right. You listed some of the challenges that American Muslim families, you know, experience just dealing with all of these issues, whether it's taking care of the elders, raising children, dealing with the political climate and Islamophobia that have been impacting our communities, especially institutional Islamophobia for a very long time. One thing I do want to bring out, which I know you would have mentioned had you had more time, is American Muslims continue to show resilience. So even with all of this, there is resiliency that's passed, especially among the elders, and try to pass to the next generation. There is a strong connection to faith, especially among younger people, and strong identification with their faith identity. And participate in a strong participation in civic life that's increasing from year to year. It might look different from one generation to another, but it's increasing. So it's important for us to also remember that, yes, there's a lot coming at us, but there's a lot of resiliency. There's a lot of participation. There is, the community is not sitting and just, being depressed and sad about it. They are finding very creative ways to really keep moving forward. And we're seeing this resiliency and attachment to faith, especially among the most the ones that are hit the hardest. So among, racially marginalized groups and among those who are experiencing poverty. One other thing I want to kind of add to the conversation is whether it's housing, whether it's dealing with mental health, resources, all of that, not only is the socioeconomic part of the equation, but also race and ethnicity is also part of it in immigration status. So we could go a lot deeper once we start talking about racial implications and especially when we're talking about systemic issues that have been part of this country for many generations. So to keep us moving, we're gonna dive into the first part, which is making decisions around schooling. Youth are not only our precious loved ones, but this is kind of building the next generation of American Muslims in this country. And making decisions around that are not the easiest thing for most families. While the majority of American Muslims do send their kids to public school, there is a growing an increase, a growing movement for Islamic in private schools, to address a lot of things, whether it's social issues or the fact that, provide a safe space for children who are bombarded with negative representation of themselves everywhere they go, and a lack of representation in the curriculum, and so kind of to strengthen their religious and cultural identity. So, Dr. Mariam, you've worked both in the private school or Islamic school setting, but also now you spearhead a research that look at schooling, especially in universities, but looking at K to 12 and school decisions for families. Can you help our audience understand a little bit, the challenges around making that decision between public schools and private and Islamic schools? What are some of the benefits in each place or some of the challenges? And is there's a common thing that we need to look at when we're making that decision?
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. I am the research and advocacy specialist at CARE National. I joined CARE National back in August, and I currently work on the Unhostile Campus campaign, which is geared towards academic freedoms and freedom of speech for students in higher ed. However, my topic today is about Muslim families navigating public and Islamic schools. And I recently actually added K through 12 campaign to the Unhostile campaigns, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and hopefully be able to answer some questions on this topic. So looking at the next slide, the overview of what I'm going to talk about today is on successes in Islamic schools. What are the challenges? What are the successes? How families can make informed decisions. So I taught in Islamic schools for over 8 years. And what I found was that they offer an environment where students' faith, identity, and cultural values are nurtured and affirmed daily. And my son, when he would walk into school at the Islamic school, felt his culture, his identity was affirmed, even with the principal playing the dua in the background as the students were walking in. And so this is the key success that Islamic schools bring to Muslim students. And from my years of teaching at the Islamic school, I found that Muslim parents report they had higher levels of satisfaction with communication, with involvement, and they felt more empowered to shape the school policies and the curriculum because they felt their voices were being heard there. And then students also benefited from a holistic education because the Islamic studies was weaved into academic subjects. They promoted moral development. And they, just to give you an example, when I was teaching math to the middle schoolers, I would oftentimes use Quranic verses to reinforce mathematical concepts because it's a private school and I was able to do that. And some of the challenges that Islamic schools face, of course, is with restricted funding, which can impact the staffing, it can impact extracurricular programs, and support services for students who had special needs. So this was one of the challenges. Another challenge is that sometimes teachers were not trained fully. They did not have the formal training in education or culturally responsive pedagogy, and this can affect the instructional quality. And then also the curriculum standards, the variability in the standards, that can create challenges when students want to transition to higher education or they want to transfer between schools. Now, the successes in public schools were often broader academic resources, extracurricular, specialized programs such as AP program, IB program, or STEM initiatives. And that's what most Muslim students enjoy with the public schools. And they are entitled, obviously, to constitutional protections. So this includes religious accommodations for prayers and attires and holidays, although the enforcement at the public school could vary from school to school. And that will come into the next slide, which are the challenges. In public schools, at CARE, we've documented widespread reports of bullying, teacher bias, administrative resistance to accommodation requests. And as mentioned earlier, the ISPU statistics of 50% of Muslim students reported bullying. We also have that statistics reported in different states, including California and Massachusetts and Washington, and across the nation. And also, curricula often excluded Muslim contributions or reinforced stereotypes, and the students felt marginalized in public schools. And although there are protections on paper at schools, it just depends on the local leadership and the climate. According to my research, the three concepts that framed the experience of Muslim students in public schools were cultural knowledge, culturally responsive leadership, and social justice leadership. So it was really framed around how the principals used their leadership style to influence Muslim students' experiences that really caused, their challenges or their successes. So here are some questions that we need to ask when we're trying to make informed decisions for our families. We need to ask, what are my child's academic, spiritual, and social needs? Because every child is different. We have differences from child to child within the same family. And so taking this question to heart is really at the core of how to bring an informed decision for your child. How welcoming is the school environment? Are the staff trained in cultural competence? And are religious accommodations honored at this school or at this institution, whether it be public or private, whether it be Islamic or non-Islamic? These informed decisions will help when you're, just making that decision about where my child should be getting their education. Also, we want to consider our academic strengths, our social emotional well-being, our religious identity. Some children may thrive in the faith-based environment. Others may benefit from resources at public schools. Here's some CARES provides some resources guidance for American Muslims that can help. In public schools, you want to inquire about policies on bullying, religious accommodations, inclusion efforts, and CARE provides a Ramadan toolkit for Islamic schools you can use for when you want to ask for accommodations. There's also building relationships with teachers and administrators. CARE has an educator's guide to Islamic religious practices. You can distribute that to your schools, to your child's classroom, and also utilize the report incident at CARE whenever there's discrimination going on to encourage anti-Islamophobia training. We have teachers curricula. We can include inclusive curricula, and we've also are currently sending newsletters to 51 state departments of ed and superintendents in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Colorado. So make sure that you're following resources from CARE and ISPU. And then on the last slide, I just wanted to reiterate, there's no one size fits all model. I myself have, I have 3 children. I've put them in Islamic schools. I've put them in public schools. I've homeschooled them. So sometimes you have to just keep trying and keep assessing where your child has safety, dignity, and long-term growth. Those are the most important things that you want for your children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mariam. I love this last note because, we cannot assume that one place will be the answer. And it depends on the child. It depends on the environment. And when you and I were talking, we talked about a couple of things that that you found have mattered across the board, whether it's in Islamic school or in the public school, which is the school leadership and the culture they set for their staff and their students. That really, really matters. And also parent engagement. So just because you send them to Islamic school doesn't mean you need to stop in engaging there, because Islamic schools have their own challenges. When they're in public schools, parent engagement is just that much important, especially when it comes to the curriculum and the culture of the district. And that's when we talk about the connection to civic engagement, that's where you could make the most impact, because school decisions are made at the very local level, at the school board and the school administration. It's not made anywhere else. And that includes representation in the curriculum. Most people do not realize how absent American Muslims are from the curriculum, all curriculum, not only absent, but the representation that exists there is negative. And so, think of the impact on the child's identity when, one, they don't see people that look like them in the curriculum that they're studying. And if they do, they only see the negative stereotypes that are reinforcing what we see in the media, which impacts, their overall identity and a relationship with themselves. So that's the place where families could make the most impact, being engaged at the local level, positively, but also reporting when things are happening. And you mentioned also the report on bullying. One significant note on that is 1 out of 4 cases in the close to 50% bullying incidents that are reported by families is actually done at the hands of the adults in the school system. So it's not just the children, it's the adults and people who are responsible for the safety and the education of your children. And again, Islamic schools have their own challenges as well. We'll share those resources in the follow-up email, but I do want to keep moving this conversation, and I'm shifting to Sister Zainab to kind of talk to us about the other end of caring for our families. And so, your organization provides services for the elderly, for American Muslim elderly. And we just shared some of the data on that fact in our communities right now. Can you tell us a little bit, like we saw that American Muslims are caring for an aging parent or in-laws, or someone older higher than other faith groups in our survey. From your work at Olive Community Services and other organizations, what are some of the most common challenges Muslim caregivers and elders face today? And are there any innovative programs or tools, models that you've seen either locally or nationally that can offer a promising approach to addressing elderly care within diverse Muslim communities?
Assalamu alaikum. First and foremost, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here amongst this very esteemed panel. Yes, the challenges, where can I begin? I mean, the data is out there. This country is aging. There will be more elders in this country because, now the family size is getting down and our baby boomer population is aging. So by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be above the age of 65. So that's, whether we like it or not, that is a number that we have to be aware of. In terms of the community and the bigger challenges that we see is the lack of awareness. We need to get loud about aging. A lot of the planning for the state and federal level, they are having master plans. In California, for example, they have the master plan on aging, and there is on their agenda, working towards foreign-born or immigrant seniors. So they have it in their minds. We just need to access those resources and really put it on our own agendas in our mosques and our communities to really plan in advance. The other thing is the fact that, social isolation was mentioned, caregiving resources. Caregiving can be expensive. 90% of seniors would like to age in place. So giving them that resources available that could allow them to do that, like, fall prevention, or having access to good, reliable upkeep in the home, or handyman resources and stuff like that. Those little things can go a long way. Transportation is another issue. After a certain age, they may not be as comfortable to drive, and language barriers are another big one that we are seeing. Now, in terms of all those challenges, we have seen success and there is hope. So Olive is a 501c3 nonprofit started in 2016, and our mission is to serve our seniors and their families. And the model that Olive wants to really initiate is connecting the seniors to the resources that the community, the government, and the family provides, and being that bridging gap that can take care of connecting people with resources. So our Live, Learn, Thrive Day program happens, in both the community setting at senior centers, as well as in mosque settings, and also online for those who cannot access it because of driving, health conditions, and whatnot. And we've seen a lot of success in getting our seniors engaged. They have said that, they have a sense of purpose now. They have, better health outcomes. They feel less lonely and isolated. And lastly, they've learned new skills, which is great for their cognitive health. What I loved that Dr. Samira mentioned was, integrating our seniors to their tax money services that are available to them. So taking our seniors to senior centers, to the exercise classes out there, so that they can really utilize those resources available to them. And we've either rented spaces or worked with the cities to get a space in those senior centers to provide more culturally sensitive education for them. Same thing at the mosque level. I have programs at the mosque on a weekly basis where I'm connecting the seniors with community resources. Today, for example, I have a program right after this session where I'm bringing a therapist to talk about how we can have conversations with our adult children, because that's a challenge that some of our seniors sometimes face. So those are things, just examples that Olive has seen success with. We've also have a collaborative called the Samina Collaborative, which has 17 organizations where they are dealing with the issues faced by the Samina community, which is the South Asian, Middle Eastern, not African. So that's a great benefit available, so that we can do research together, we can connect resources together. Intergenerational programming is another big thing that I think that connects to all that we're talking about today. We have 6 generations in existence, all the way from traditionalists to the alpha generation. We do nature walks with children, leading them, story time where they're sharing stories to build resilience in schools and youth groups. We've seen nursing home education. We don't have the capacity to start a nursing home today, but we can go and educate nursing room staff about the Muslim or cultural practices, so that they may better understand the need of Muslim clients and patients. Advocating for halal meals, be it through, meal services available in the area, or local restaurants providing meals for our seniors at a discounted level price. And then there is programs through the city and state. One is the Medi-Cal expansion, or Medicaid, which is known nationally across the United States. That has something called in-home support services. So I think different states have different versions of it. Illinois, Michigan, New Jersey, they all have programs with a different name. Another program is called the Assisted Living Waiver, which can allow with some of the cost to assisted living facilities. We have Medicare education, which is important, that needs to be done in a timely manner so people can educate and sign up without having to pay a penalty fee. And lastly, there is the Eden alternative, which is a concept or a philosophy of connecting children, plants, and companion animals with nursing home clients. So these are all models that we can adopt to. I leave with a simple summary of pacing ourselves. P as in planning ahead, plan for your parents' retirement, not just about, buying a grave. Think of the golden years, making sure it's healthy and fulfilling. Spread the awareness about aging, connecting them to the resources. So take the time to connect them, signing up for government and community resources, gyms, whatever, so that they're physically active, mentally active, and socially active. And lastly, empowering them. Just like they empowered us, they're a generation of sacrifice that came to this country, most of them, and really sacrificed for their kids. So I hope that we really engage them and make them feel that they deserve to be given back to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I know we could have gone more. There's a lot more to share here,
Yes.
but for the sake of time, we'll keep this moving, and we have an opportunity to add a little bit more during the Q&A portion, which I see some questions here in the Q&A box. So please input your question right now as I share them with our panelists. I'll start with some of the questions that have been answered. We will share a recording. There's some of the topics, like in-depth parts of these conversations, like palliative care, hospice, all of these, like a little bit more in-depth, we have not gotten into yet. But those are conversations that are now popping up in our community as more and more people are speaking about the sandwich generation and taking care of the elders. And on the other hand, more research need to be done on the schooling part. We have few reports on Islamic schools, which we will share in our after webinar email. And I know there are other resources around caring for elders. The other question that was answered here was the third of the American Muslim population that were at poverty. Was it impacted by refugees coming in? Do we know? Probably. We don't have the breakdown because we have not done any specific research on, refugees specifically. But that's also impacted by racial and ethnic grouping. And then another question that was here was the data that we talked about today. Do we have the breakdown, the racial breakdown? We do not, because the sample was too small, but I am sure our panelists can talk about the racial implications and, of course, the environmental, implications of all of these topics. And I know in the housing one, specifically, racial data is very significant. Where racial communities live are impacted by institutional policies like redlining and things like that, but also with environmental issues. So there is often a overlap between low income racial categories and polluted or environmental communities that are not environmentally clean. So there's often an overlap between those three things, which then there's an overlap too with not enough funding for schools, so not great performing schools and not as many resources for elders. So all of these topics, like I mentioned, are so interconnected. We don't have the specific data on it, but I know others have looked into that. So some of the other questions that are left are Muslim families with caregivers aware of getting paid by local government agencies? I want to broaden this a little bit. I know Dr. Samira and Sister Zainab, you both shared resources on, and talked about um, uh, being aware of the federal and the state and the government agencies' resources. Can both of you share a little bit more? Do do our communities know about these resources? What are your organizations doing, or what are some of the projects that are out there to kind of highlight that? And I want to kind of add another piece. Is there's a way to replicate some of this process without having to reinvent the wheel in every state? So let's start with Sister Zainab and then Dr. Samira.
Thank you for that question. Absolutely. I receive all the phone calls at all of community services, and almost 3 out of every 5 phone calls is about caregiving. And, mom and dad had a fall. Now they need support and help. And it's a challenge because caregiving can be very expensive. It can minimally start at 25, can go up to 50 plus, depending on the level of need. So the program I mentioned, in-home support services, it is for people who qualify for Medi-Cal or Medicaid. That's what it's called in California. So adding to what you were just saying, so if I, for example, qualify for Medi-Cal, I can become a caregiver for my parent, because anyways, I'm taking care of my parent, or it could be a spouse. And you would get, it's a minimum wage price, but at least you have some kind of an income for something that you're already doing. Now, that is one thing. And then a lot of people are like, well, I don't qualify for Medicaid or Medi-Cal. Recently, they did have an expansion wherein you can own a home and still qualify for Medi-Cal. So these are simple things that are happening, and we need to get loud. The more we pressurize our local government or officials, sometimes, doors will open because they do have those services available. And lastly, I think it's important for us to take the time to apply. Even if you it says no to you or you don't qualify, you did the job, at least you tried. Because without trying, we're never going to get all our answers. Sometimes we switch to like, oh, well, I'm never going to qualify for something. And we recently did a health fair. We partnered with a local healthcare organization, and a lot of our seniors came and they applied. They had live people doing applications. The Social Security office was there. And it really showed the power of just making that connection, making that effort of going out there. There is a sense of pride in our communities sometimes. It's unfortunate that we think, oh, we might not qualify for public assistance, but it doesn't hurt. Even there's like programs that will give you food assistance for college students, for seniors. It would help with groceries. So these are small things that are coming up that I think we should definitely make an effort to apply for.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to add a little bit to what Zainab said. I think also recognize, all of these programs exist. There may be state by state differences. So that's one of the things that we're finding is that most people, many of our elders and our Muslim community members don't know about what resources are available. And so one of the biggest opportunities that we have as individuals who are looking to support our community is making sure that we are aware of the resources are available. Like I was mentioning earlier about a project that we were doing in a particular city, and 90% of the elders did not know that these resources exist for them, right? So that's one issue. Awareness is an issue. The recognition and understanding that they are state dependent or even county dependent. So it does take some effort from the community to figure that out. And I think the other issue was raised was a lot of assumptions are, we have to recognize that our community is very diverse. And some people are citizens, some people are refugees, some people are green card holders or undocumented. And so not all of these resources are available. So then we as a community need to understand who are the individuals who are not able to receive these services and what can we do through community supports or other ideas to help support them. So I think that's one thing that we want to think about. And the other area, I think, Petra, you mentioned about replicability. And I think that's one of the things that we are working toward. A couple weeks ago, I was actually over at Olive, when we were meeting about, okay, how do we work together to take the project that we did, the work that they're doing, and make sure that it is nationwide. And part of it, we really want to figure out what are the kinks, so that are, for our local effort, so that, we can document this and then share it nationally. And that's some of the work that we're doing. So if you are familiar of areas that are doing great work on the ground, like Olive, working with Olive as well as the FYI, to bring it together so that we have multiple templates across the nation that our community can start building. And so when we're doing this, first thing is awareness. Second thing is creating the templates. I think Mark mentioned that a little bit. And the third thing would then be to how do we push it out and disseminate it within our communities so that we are able to implement it and promote healthy aging.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. I want to ask Brother Mark one question about because he both works, at the local government, but also within the community. We often approach many topics, putting the burden on, the Muslim community and its leaders. Reach out, do this, do that. What is, from your own experience, what role can government agencies, whether they have Muslim employees or not, when they have, a specific community, a religious community like the Muslim community, what role or what approach can they do to reach out and assess the needs and see what are the needs that exist, in those communities outside of people coming into them?
That's a great question. What can they do to reach out more? Well, I will say, just to reframe that a little bit, I think ultimately, it behooves us to be more proactive in establishing those relationships with various agencies, office holders, et cetera. Ultimately, so much of, what electeds or bureaucrats are going to pay attention to is it's what they're aware of, and who the squeaky wheel gets the oil, so to speak, or gets the grease. And so folks who make themselves available, who make their institutions open to electeds and administrators visiting them, and those becoming known sort of sites for outreach. I think that's really important for us to do. In our local community with Dream, we were able to make the Muslim Center a site for a large-scale job recruitment effort because we had established that relationship with Detroit at Work, for instance. I know that that's a little off topic, but just giving you one example of you can bring those resources to your community if folks know who you are, and you can't assume that they're going to know who we are. I think we sometimes assume our community is bigger than it is, or is more well known or more well understood than it is. That said, and I say that I started there just to say that the onus is on us to get the benefit out of these things. That said, I do think that these offices are increasingly trying to establish more relationships with houses of worship, which have always played a central sort of role in community development. And I think it's a very well-known role that churches play, and I think the masajid that are doing that sort of comprehensive community support need to let that be known. I think that they're also looking for nonprofit partners, right? And they're looking for that sort of nonprofit sector or civic sector to serve as partners and intermediaries. And there's almost this assumption that we do have certain types of organizations, that we do have the Olives, that we do have the Muslim Family Services, et cetera. And so, us creating those institutions creates a vehicle for them to reach out, for government agencies to reach out to us. I think also we have to be sort of tracking what's available and then being better networkers. So a lot of times the resources that governments are putting out, they're not, some things are annual allotments, right? There's a continuum of care for homelessness services. It could see a lot more resources, but it exists. It's sort of there year to year. You can tap into it. Sometimes there's huge influxes of resources that are one-time allocations, or they're emergency relief funds, things that are going to help our seniors clear up their basements and replace their sewer lines so that their basements aren't flooding, things that are going to help our seniors get access to home repair funds, especially if you're in a neighborhood like ours or large parts of the city that have aging housing stock. Other sort of efforts that are only going to come with generational or once a decade type of legislation. The folks who are plugged into those things have to play connector roles with other organizations to make sure that those opportunities filter through. So those are just a few reactions to that question.
I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. It's like we still have to do the work. And sometimes we think of civic engagement just around elections and voting. And yes, that is true. But all of these topics that we're talking about here have connections to whether it's the local, state, or federal government, and anyone should be able to reach out and say, here's what we're working on, where can I find the resources, or how can I be connected as an expert. That's another piece that I encourage people who are working on elderly care, schooling, all of that. You are experts on these topics and on these fields, and often Muslims are not at those tables because people don't know Muslims who are working on them. So be visible, show up, and show up as an expert on these topics. Last question I'm gonna hand over to Dr. Mariam, before we close today's session is around reporting and making sure that we hold, in this case, school systems, whether it's a K-12 or universities, accountable visibly. This is something that Muslims have not done well in the past, and we're shifting. We're raising more awareness around that, especially around bullying and addressing the needs of Muslim students. So it is important to highlight the positive examples and the work that's done well in the school system. But what is your word for our families in our communities in terms of really reporting and tracking what goes on in their children's schools and making sure that we report it to organizations that are tracking it? Why does that matter? If you could very quickly tell us why that's important for our community nationally, not just in one community.
Yeah, this is a really, really important topic. Reporting numbers are really low from our community. And it's usually just because families feel that they're not going to be heard, they're not seen. However, we have these engaged organizations like CARE. CARE, if you report to CARE, you will immediately get either a free lawyer or a free advocate to talk to the principal, to talk to the school, to talk to the teachers, and to build whatever relationship that you're trying to build in a positive way. And then also to stand up for you, to advocate for you and your child. And that's really, really important for your child's mental health, for your child's dignity, for your child's safety, that you as a parent report any discrimination, report any unjust curricula that's being shared at the school. I mean, you talked about that before, Peter, how it's just becoming a phenomenon that at most public schools, the curricula that they're teaching about Islam, about Muslims, it's incorrect. And we really need parents on the ground, parents in those schools, talking to those principals, talking to those teachers, and reporting those incidents. If you go on care.com, you'll find several incidents where care lawyers have fought lawsuits and advocated for students who've seen things like Islamophobia in their test or in their classroom being displayed in different ways. And these parents come forward, they complain about it to CARE, and it's really, really supporting our community as a whole, our ummah as a whole. I myself grew up in the northern part of Florida, and it was a small town. We were the only Muslim family. And so this really runs deep for me. This discrimination issue really runs deep for me. And I would encourage, like you said, we need more experts in the field at the school board meetings, at the parent-teacher conferences, at the parent-teacher meetings, visibly Muslim, visibly talking about Islam and advocating for our values.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone who joined us and stayed this whole 90 minutes with us. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Dr. Samira. Thank you, Mark, Dr. Mariam. This is the beginning of this conversation. A few takeaways from me is let's build on resources that already exist and just replicate them. Please do not reinvent the wheel. We do not have the resources or the time as a community to do that. Please be vocal in your expertise, whether it's at the local level, state, or national level. Please report. It's important to talk about issues within our communities, but if we don't report them and systemically track them, then for decision makers, they just did not happen, and we cannot advocate. And the last thing is, please remember, this is a community that, with all the challenges that it faces, it is building family, building community, and it's being very resilient and connected to its faith. So let's continue, let's remember that and remind ourselves that we do come from a place of strength and resilience, and build on that and connect with people who are doing amazing work. We will share resources in a follow-up email. So thank you all for joining us today. This will be recorded and shared on our social media and different platforms. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.